Right before we jump into this video, if you haven't signed up for the FroKnowsPhoto email list, just look for this orange box over on the website, put your name, email address in it, and I will send you a free guide to capturing motion in low-light situations. Jared Polin, FroKnowsPhoto.com, and this is a review of the Sigma 14-24 2.8 for the Sony E Mount Cameras. Now, this is the first 14-24 2.8 that you can get on any of these Sony bodies. Now, I got to take it out into the real world on assignment to photograph Bernie Sanders on the campaign trail. That was the first time I used this lens. I didn't have anything else that I wanted to take because I wanted to take the 14-24 2.8 over the Sony 12-24 f4 because I knew the lighting situations would have been darker. Now we're gonna get into sample images, and I'm gonna show you a bunch of different images from the road with Bernie to the Philadelphia Museum of Art, as well as photographing in a kitchen of a brand new restaurant. But let's start off with how it feels. This is not a super duper heavy lens. Though some people may say that 1.75 pounds or 795 grams is heavy, it's not for a 14-24. Let's put it next to the Nikon 14-24, which feels much heavier and actually has a more bulbous front end. But by the way, this is probably one of the best engineering feats in lens history at the time when it came out 16 years ago. It's still a version 1. They never updated it, and they never will until they get to the Z mount system. So let me throw this back down here, and by throw, I mean actually place down gently. How are the rings on this camera? The manual focus ring I actually didn't touch at all, but it is super smooth and super easy to turn. Very nice. In terms of the zoom ring, it is a little tighter. I've felt this all the time with the Sigma lenses, is that they feel like they're ratcheted tighter, that it takes a little more energy to turn them. I prefer when I have this on a camera to be able to use my thumb to turn it and not have to grip down and turn. That's one of the concerns I have with this lens, is that it's a little on the tighter side, and I wonder if it's gonna loosen out the more that you use it. This is the front element. It's protected here by the lens hood. This lens hood does not come off, but you also can't put filters on the front of this lens, which some people are like, I can't put filters on there. But then Sigma's like, well, yeah, you can. You can put them on the back. So right here in the back element, you can get special filters right here to put onto this. So if you're a landscape photographer, you can put your ND filters, you can put your polarizing filters, you can put them back here on the lens. Also, on the side of the lens, you have a switch. It is AF to manual. I always leave it on AF. Of course, if you're manually focusing, then you can put it on MF. Right here, there's a programmable AEL button right here. I don't actually set this button to anything because when I'm shooting, my hand is on the zoom ring and not worrying about pressing this button right here. But some of you may like to program that with one of the Sony cameras that you're using. But let's jump into the first picture right here, which was taken at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. It's at 1/3200th of a second at f2.8 ISO 100 using the Sony A9, because at the time I did not have an A7R4, so I used the Sony A9 to take this image. The only reason I take this and share it with you is so that you can look around the edges of the frame to determine whether or not there's chromatic aberration, how the bowing looks at the end, how the vignetting is. But in this case, when you look at the center of the image, I like the slight little bend up that you get with this 14-24 at 14. Now we've seen with the Nikon Z cameras, when you use an ultra wide angle lens, it's automatically doing lens correction for you. You can't even turn it off. It's like baked in, which I'm not a big fan of, but in this case, I think that is a nice looking soft little slope of a straightish line, and I'm happy with how that looks. Moving on to the next image. Now this is Bernie Sanders doing what's called a clutch. A clutch happens before a campaign rally where a bunch of supporters meet in a room with the senator, and he answers their questions and listens to their concerns and gives some feedback. It's actually pretty cool. But one of the things that people ask me about this lens or are more concerned about is the autofocus slow? Does it hunt? Does it hold you back from getting the images that you need to get? And the answer is no. In combination with the A7R IV, I didn't run into any issues with autofocus where I felt like, oh man, that lens moved too slow and I missed the shot because it's not a Sony native lens. I didn't have that issue at all. In this case, I focused right here in the middle on the Senator using IAF, used the people on the side of the images to draw you in. They are slightly out of focus. Now, speaking of out of focus, you can get to within 11 inches. That's a close focus distance. So if you need to get within 11 inches of your subject, that's as close as you can get with your autofocus. Let me jump in here real quick and say the images that you're seeing on the screen right now were taken with this 14 to 24 2.8 and edited using FroPack 1. If you're looking to speed up your RAW workflow or give yourself a great starting point, we created 14 custom Lightroom presets that you can check out right now at FroKnowsPhoto.com/presets. Over there, you can play with the sliders to see the befores and the afters, and if you decide to pick them up right now, they are 40% off for a limited amount of time. Moving on to the next image, you can see the Senator on the left-hand side of the frame with some supporters on the right-hand side of the frame, and when we zoom in here on the right-hand side, you can see what happens at 14 millimeters. The heads start to bow just a little bit. Anything on the outside of the frames here are going to stretch out just a little bit. So if you're shooting a wedding with a lens like this and you have the bride, you may not want to put her on the left-hand side or the right-hand side close to the edges. Now, if you go about, 1/3 of the way in, that might be the point where you don't get any of that bowing. But in this case, we'll go to where the Senator is. You can see that he's stretched out just a little bit, but this image is more to show you how wide you can get and what you can see at 14 millimeters. When the Senator is done giving his campaign speech, he comes down and around to do a rope line, to do handshakes and take selfies. And this is where he's moving quickly. So this is where a fast autofocusing lens comes in handy, especially using IAF of the A7R IV. I love IAF, and honestly, it's changed the way that I shoot. It allows me to focus on composition like this. Now, this one is at 24 millimeters. Remember when I said 1/3 away from the edge of the frame? Here's the Senator, and when you zoom in on his eyes and his glasses right here, he is perfectly tack sharp. The contrast is beautiful. Even when we're shooting at, what ISO are we at? We're at ISO 2500. It holds up well in terms of focus, in terms of clarity, in terms of contrast. I absolutely love what I'm getting out of this lens. And with that being said, don't forget you can download sample RAW files over on the website. The link is up on the screen. Now remember, these are my RAW files. I am giving them to you for personal use only. They are not to be published or sold or anything along those lines. You can just use them to pixel peep, and if you want to print them out for personal use, by all means, go ahead and do that. Continuing on, we have an ultra wide angle shot. This one was done at 1/250th of a second at f2.8 ISO 400. We are at 14 millimeters. So I walked up and got a little higher because I found some higher ground to get an ultra wide shot at 14 millimeters. We can see the tones, we can see the colors, we can see the sharpness. It was overcast, but you can zoom in on this image as much as you want and see that it's basically tack sharp front to back, even at 2.8, because that's what happens when you shoot wider. Now, some of the concerns that people may have is that I put this on a 61 megapixel camera, so how did it handle with the resolution? And I don't see any issues. I enjoyed shooting it, and you can see with this image that the colors and the tones and everything in terms of sharpness and contrast looks perfectly fine. I've never been a big fan of using third-party glass. Whenever I had my Nikon, I used all Nikons. I rarely used any of the Tamrons or Sigmas. And nowadays, something like a Tamron 70-200 2.8G we thought was a fantastic lens when we tested it out for the F mount. And now that I'm using the Sony more often, Sony doesn't offer me a 14 to 24 2.8. They actually offer right here, this is a 12 to 24 f4, and it's basically, it's the same size. It's a little lighter, but it's like Sigma was like, oh, this lens design looks good. Instead of making it a 12 to 24 f4, let's make it a 14 to 24 2.8. Would I rather have 12 millimeters? Sure. But with this lens, a lot of vignetting on the Sony side. It's not super duper sharp around the edges as much as it is at 14 millimeters with the Sigma. So those are the trade-offs. And the fact that it's an f4 means I have to bump that ISO slightly higher when I'm in a darker situation, which may lead to less good color and sharpness and tones. I prefer to go with the 14 to 24 2.8, especially when the 14 to 24 Sigma is priced at $1399.99 compared to the Sony, which is $1,773 at the time of this recording. I would go Sigma all day at this point. If you're interested in purchasing this lens new or looking for some other lenses used or to trade in some old gear, head on over to allenscamera.com. Now, they've been supporting me since day one, and I continue to support them because they are a mom and pop camera store that's been around since the late 70s. So for more information, go to allenscamera.com, and don't forget to tell them that the Fro sent you. We've got a few more sample images here. I used this lens quite a bit in the last couple of months, and that's why I'm showing you a bunch of these images. This image right here was taken at 2500 ISO in a kitchen after a campaign rally. You can then zoom in and see that the senator's in focus. His body man right here, he's pretty much in focus because we're at 2.8. I'm ultra wide. You can look at the edges of the frame just to see how it stretches it out just a little bit, but the lines look super straight. This image is cool because I waited in this spot and I wanted this angle. I didn't want a straight on angle. I wanted an angle where the wall was like this, the other wall was like this, and the senator was walking towards me. I just love how all of those lines act as natural drawers in to the center of the frame. That's why we call them leading lines. They lead you somewhere, either in or either out. This next image is super low during a campaign rally where there were 10,000 people in Colorado. Now, I went black and white for this because I don't think that the color worked out, but when you look on the left-hand side of the frame, you're like, why do you have the railing there? Well, the answer is the railing's on the left, the railing's on the right. I left it there because that's what it looked like. I'm not saying that this is a super duper winning image. It just felt right to leave the railings in there because I couldn't get any closer and have it shoot at 14 millimeters. Continuing on with the last three images, I got to photograph a brand new restaurant in Philly called Condessa. I know the managers and the owners of it, and I said, hey, I want to come out and take some photos, and they're like, sure. So just to show you some 14 millimeters, what are we shooting this one at? This one is at 1/40th, holy Jesus, why am I at 1/40th of a second at 2.8 at 64 ISO? But guess what? Doesn't have image stabilization, okay? What other 14 millimeter has image stabilization? Because it's all built into the body. 1/40th of a second, and he looks perfectly sharp right here, and the tones and the contrast looks fantastic in combination with the A7R4. I just like this kitchen shot in terms of the composition because we've got the owner and I believe he's one of the owners on the right-hand side. He's overseeing the kitchen as people are working. That's why I like that angle. I'm a fan of straight on with subjects where the lines are straight, but I'm also a fan of coming to the side and getting straight lines that run the other ways, like I said, leading you through something, in this case, leading you down and through the kitchen. But the tones are great and everything along those lines. Finishing up with this image right here, just another low angle shot, really super duper sharp right on his face, 1/100th of a second, f2.8, ISO 320. I love having the 2.8. I don't worry about things being out of focus at 2.8 because when you're shooting ultra wide, 2.8's basically gonna be in focus front to back unless you get super close to your subject, and in that case, you're gonna be able to see some bokeh and some blowing out in the background of the focus. So as you can tell, I use this lens quite a bit in real world situations in combination with the A7R4, which is 61 megapixels. I think this is a must-own lens for any professional Sony shooter. $1399 compared to the $1773 of the 12 to 24, which isn't actually a G Master lens. Like I said, I've always had hesitations with the third-party glass, but at this point, Sigma has been crushing it for years with their art lenses. Is this an art lens? Yes, it's an art lens. I didn't even mention that earlier. It is one of their art lines of lenses. It was fantastic. It focused quickly. It didn't hold me back. I love the contrast. I love the tones. I love the sharpness. I absolutely love this lens and recommend it to anybody who's doing photojournalistic work, who's shooting weddings. Honestly, you can't go wrong with a 14 to 24 in the bag. And if you're a professional, this is a must-own Sony lens for the E Mount systems. If you have any questions, concerns, comments, please leave them down below. Don't forget to give this video a big thumbs up, and that is where I'm gonna leave it. Jared Polin, FroKnowsPhoto, See ya.